Welcome this evening to our video, and bonjour.
We'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of LUPQP1 and home to many Métis and other Indigenous people in the Thunder Bay region. So nice to see you and hope you had a relaxing Family Day weekend.
Tonight we're commenting on Module 4 and Module 5 as we move forward through the course, and we only have a couple more weeks left and a couple more modules. Really of interest to a lot of people, and the comments were rich and the discussion was quite complex regarding Dr. Tranter's his PowerPoint on the relationship and building in the relationship bank. But I think one of the really key points that we wanted to highlight about that, and more than one person pulled through the thread from our Module 3 on our FNMI framework and the work that we did with Pam Agua. And what's really key here is that genuine, authentic relationships, they take time. Many people, including Dr. Tranter, say it's not rocket science, and it's not, but it takes a dedication that is genuine. And children certainly can always smell.
Oh, yes.
Smell a rat, and certainly can others. And when you're working particularly with Indigenous populations or Indigenous people in your school, you are not just building a relationship for that year or for the classroom or the time that you're in the school for the 3 years. This is a relationship that's rebuilding damage from hundreds of years. And that takes a kind of forethought and persistence in relationship building, and you have to be doing the depositing in the bank because you are coming from a space, whether it is it's not a point I often say this to people, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, but the fact is that the school system is associated with that system that has done so much damage. And you come with what we would call baggage as a leader in a school system. And so you're not just creating a relationship from scratch, you're undoing damage through that relationship building piece. And I think if you look back at Dr. Tranter's, and many people did that way, look at that PowerPoint, you'll see why it is so critical and why it's really important and how much work it actually does take, even to do some of the simplest things and to be persistent about it and to be genuine and to be authentic and to think in your mind that you are working towards reconciliation, that it's not an isolated relationship building piece. So I think that was something that came through in many of the posts. It's something we think about on a regular basis. The article we wrote for the CPCO, we really talk about that relationship building piece. I think that's the piece we want to highlight tonight.
And I think it was articulated by one of the students in particular, where she really didn't even like the piggy bank money deposits when it was in relation to working with Indigenous people. And I would agree with that. I thought that was an interesting point I hadn't yet read before, but certainly as the argument was made, it was well supported. And when we think about the reconciliation piece, you know, as you said, it means you're giving up something, whether you're giving up your time, whether you're giving up your power, whether you're giving up your space, whatever you're giving up, you have to give up something. And often many somethings. Yeah. And those relationships aren't quick and easy, and they're not short. So when you're building those relationships, you're building those relationships for life. So even though you might just be in that school community, you really have to be thinking about, am I in it for the long haul? It's not a quick date, it's a long marriage. And I guess for an analogy, but I think it's really about, I think back to one of my first classes I had here in Thunder Bay in 1998, and those kids are adults now with families of their own, and I see their grandparents, and I still inquire, how so out. And so these are relationships that started 20 plus years ago, but they are still relationships that are ongoing and that are still important to me and important to my place and space in the community. Now, along that same line, if we think about the critical elements that support the growth of students and staff, these relationships, I believe, is probably the most critical element. And many of you talked about a variety of different elements, but relationships were definitely key to them. Christy had just received a short text from one of her staff checking in to see how things were going because they had an incident that happened at school today. And so, that was demonstrated to Christy that she's been 2 years in the school. She's developed a relationship with her educational staff. And people are actually checking back now with Christy to say, hey, how are you doing? Thinking about you. Have a good sleep tonight. Try not to worry too much about, whatever it is that would happen. But those elements of that reciprocity, I think, are the genuine pieces that support the growth of people. When people feel safe, when people feel secure, when people feel valued, then they bloom. I guess if I'm thinking of a rose, like all the cultivation that has to happen for something to grow and be nurtured.
Well, that relationship piece, that trusting safe space, that leads, and we know the research is out there ad nauseum, and it's quoted at us quite often. That space has to exist for people to be willing to take risks, to change practice, to grow in their practice, to continue to support students in the most effective ways. Know. Exactly. If that exists, then that happens, and that kind of collaborative inquiry that we've been talking about, and that collaborative goal building and the willingness for people to transform practice occurs. Without it, it doesn't. It just won't.
And listening, that was another piece that a lot of people commented on, was the importance of listening well, listening deeply, and just simply listening, and really hearing what the challenges are, what the issues are, what the hopes are. And I know this question talks about students and staff, but I would also insert parents and community into that as well. Now, this next part, which is probably one of my favorite parts in part one, are the meeting with current administrators, where you have to develop and ask about 4 or 5 questions. This is, I find, to me, this is the gem of the whole part of this. And it's because you're actually getting to ask from experienced administrators their best advice on whatever it is that you're pursuing with them. And then moving into Module 5.
So school council, and really I roll these into really one, the school council and community partnership piece in particular. School councils are absolutely necessary and critical to your success in a school. They can be very difficult to manage because they very often have multiple personalities, multiple viewpoints, working together. Now, they often are working towards a common goal, but some of the role you really can play there is to first develop those relationships with everyone on that council. That includes your chair, right down to the people who come sporadically. And why that's so important is because then you get a chance to have a sense of the viewpoints that are being brought forward and what's important to the parents in your school from many different views. And so that's really critical to your success. And managing it, I take a hands-off approach to their management because it's their council. So I let them work through a lot of those things, and I report to them. That's the other piece of this.
Yeah,
you actually report to them.
Yeah.
You're not, it's one of those bodies where you go, but you don't control this body.
Right.
They do. Sometimes you do have to step in and help with things like group norms, but always maintaining that solid relationship that doesn't show prejudice.
It's an advice body too.
Yeah,
right?
it really is. And they can be and often are your greatest supporters. Not managed well, it can be a really difficult piece too for your school going forward.
You want to have a good relationship.
Yes.
And not go in there and boss them around
No.
and say, this is what I want you to do, this is what I need you
It's
to
their
approve.
council, and I think that's what I always keep in my mind is it's their council.
You serve them.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
probably the biggest thing
and
to
in
keep in
our
mind.
board, and I'm sure in many boards, every year they ask school council whether they want to keep the leader or not. So they get input on who their school principal is. So it is important, and they are critical to the success. And they're often what makes up that difference. I know those of you who've looked at the funding formulas, they are what makes up the difference between what we can't support from the ministry level or funding levels and the programming that you really want for children.
I'm going to just interject. I went to visit one of the high school open houses with my daughter and her friend, and they had a big room filled with a couple hundred people, and the principal got on and did his big introduction, and then he invited the school council chair up. Man, was she pumped about that school and what that school did for her children. And it was infectious and contagious listening to her speak about how great the staff were, how great the students were, how great the school community was. Like she was a walking infomercial for how awesome that school was and her 3 children that attended there. And I thought, as a parent, and I was there with one of my children, I thought, yeah, this, it's not just my older daughter who goes there who's coming home saying this. There are other parents who are quite active in the school who are feeling the same way. And that's, quite reassuring, I think, as a parent of a school-age child.
And I just want a word on community partnerships. The traditional model of community partnerships is, what can you give us? So the community partner donates, computer equipment, or it donates sporting equipment.
Bread.
Or bread, right.
That's one of my partners.
The problem is that's not a partnership. That's
No.
You've gone out and found someone who can give things to you. Yeah. And sometimes there's a cost with that. You have to advertise for them freely. But a real true community partnership means that they become part of the school community. They're in working with the school, with the education path. And we're doing currently in our school something called academies, and I think that really builds on that community hub. We are drawing on the expertise and knowledge of our community, and they come in as partners to help teach and educate our children and connect them to that community. That's, if you go forward with one thing out of community partnerships, that would be something I'd like you to go forward with out of this course.
Find that common ground. And I would say along with that community partnerships is the word reciprocity.
And they are the wraparound support. We all know today's schools are challenged with many issues, and there's a great big focus right now, of course, on well-being, and well-being relies on community partners. Then that wraparound support has to happen for a school, and that doesn't happen if you're not working with those partners, and that reciprocity is not there, and they don't have a space, a real true space in your school. So go forward with thinking about community partnerships in that way.
So on that note, I'm going to pull a tricky go forth and prosper. But have a great week.
Yeah.
And we'll be in touch online. And I think we're all caught up with emails. So if you have any questions, just by all means, just keep sending them in. By the end of part 1, you should have your practicum organized so that you can work on it between part 1 and part 2. And whether that means you're working on it this spring or whether you're working on it in the fall. Or in the spring and fall, it really doesn't matter. But if you have any questions about it, just send us a draft and we'll have a look at it for you and give you some feedback on it. And then you can get that signed by your principal mentor, wherever that may be.
Yes. Okay.
So you have a great week.
Have a great week. Thank you.